Going into the exam, it's going to be extremely important to understand the difference between RDS read replicas and multi-AZ and understand exactly the use cases for those. So this lecture is really dedicated to understanding read replicas and multi-AZ. So let's get started with the read replicas. Read replicas, as the name indicates, help you to scale your reads. So let's have an example. Here we have our application and we have an RDS database instance. And our application performs reads and writes to our database instance. But say we want to scale the reads because that main database instance cannot scale enough. It receives too many requests. Well, we can create up to 5 read replicas. And they can be within the same availability zone, cross availability zone, or cross region. So 3 different options, and they're very important to remember. So say we have another RDS instance read replica and another one. And what will happen is that there will be an asynchronous replication between the main RDS database instance and the 2 read replicas. Asynchronous, that means that the reads are eventually consistent. What that means is that, for example, if your application reads from the read replica before they had the chance to replicate the data, then you may get all data. And this is why it's called eventually consistent asynchronous replication. And these replicas, they can be awesome for reading, for scaling reads, but they can also be promoted to their own database. So you can take one of these replicas and say, okay, I want it to be its own database now, and take writes. And so you promote it to its own database. It's completely out of the replication mechanism after that, but it lives and has its own lifecycle afterwards. So in case you want to use read replicas, the main application in orange in the top of the screen must update the connection string to leverage the list of all the read replicas you have in your RDS cluster. Okay, very nice. So let's talk about a classic use case for your read replica. So in this example, we have a production database and it is taking on normal load. So here we go. Our production database is having read and write to our main RDS database instance. And a new team comes in and say, we want to run some reporting and some analytics on top of your data. And so if you plug in that reporting application onto the main RDS database instance, then it's going to overload it and possibly slow down the production application. And you don't want that. So instead, what you do as a solutions architect is you create a read replica to run the new workload there. So you create a read replica. There is some asynchronous replication that happens between your main RDS database instance and your read replica. And then your reporting application can just do reads from your read replica and run the analytics there. The production application is completely unaffected in this case, and that's perfect. So remember, if you have a read replica, you need to ensure that it is only for select type of statements, and select is a SQL keyword. Select means read, and so you cannot use keywords such as insert, update, or delete, which change the database itself. Okay, read replicas is only for reads. So let's talk about the networking cost associated with RDS read replica. So in AWS, you should know that normally there is a cost when the data goes from one availability zone to another. But there are exceptions, and these exceptions are usually for managed services. So for RDS read replica, this is a managed service. If your read replica is within the same region, okay, different AZ, but same region, you're not paying that fee. So what this means is that if you have a RDS DB instance in US East 1A, and then a read replica in US East 1B, and there is a asynchronous replication because this is a read replica, even though the traffic goes from one AZ to a different AZ, that replication traffic is going to be free because RDS is a managed service and they give you that traffic for free. But if you are using a cross-region read replica, so you are in one region, US East 1, and you go to another region, EU West 1, for example, then your RDS DB instance and your read replica will have replication that will go across regions, and this will incur a replication fee for your network. Finally, let's talk about RDS multi-AZ. And multi-AZ is mainly used for disaster recovery. So we have our application, and it performs reads and writes to our master database instance, which is in availability zone A. And what we're going to have is a synchronous replication to a standby instance in AZB, and it will replicate every single change in the master synchronously. So that means that when your application writes to the master, that change needs to also be replicated to the standby to be accepted. And so what we get out of it is one DNS name. So your application talks to one DNS name, And in case there is a problem with the master, there will be an automatic failover to the standby database thanks to that one DNS name. So thanks to this, we increase the availability. This is why it's called multi-AZ. And there will be failover in case we lose an entire AZ, or we lose the network, or there is an instance or storage failure for the master database, in which case, obviously, the standby database will become the new master. You don't need to do any manual intervention in your apps. As long as it tries to keep on connecting to your database, automatically at some point it will fail over to the standby that will be promoted as the master, and you'll be good. And it's not used for scaling. So as you can see here, the standby database is just for standby. No one can read to it, no one can write to it. It's just here as a failover in case anything goes on with your master database. So quick question is there a possibility to have the read replicas being set up as multi-AZ for disaster recovery? And the answer is yes. You can set up your read replicas as multi-AZ if you wanted to. And that is a common exam question, okay? So that's it for the difference between read replicas and multi-AZ, but you need to absolutely understand this going into the exam because a lot of questions will go and be about it. So a question that can come up in the exam is around how do we make an RDS database go from single AZ to multi-AZ. So what you should know is that it is a zero downtime operation. That means you do not need to stop the database to go from single AZ to multi-AZ. The only thing you need to do is to click on modify for the database and enable multi-AZ. That means that your RDS database instance is going to go to have a master, to have a standby DB with synchronous replication without you doing anything except modifying that setting, and the database will not stop. Now, this is what the exam will ask you, but I want to show you what will happen behind the scenes for it to work. So the following will happen internally. There will be a snapshot taken by RDS automatically of your main database, and this snapshot will be restored into a new standby database, okay? And then once the standby database is restored, there will be synchronization established between the two databases, and so therefore the standard database will catch up to the main RDS database, and there you go, you will be in a multi-AZ setup. So that's it for this lecture. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next lecture.